Welcome back to the Unabated Podcast. I'm Gina Fiore. This week, I sit down with legendary oddsmaker Roxy Roxborough. We talk about the business of sports betting, what makes a strong betting team, and how money affects relationships outside of the gambling world. I'm always happy to run into Roxy, and I've been looking forward to recording this episode with him. Please enjoy this discussion with Roxy Roxborough.
That's a new word, unabated. That's the biggest word I know.
Today, I'm talking to sports gambling legend and oddsmaker Roxy Roxborough. Hi, Roxy.
Hi, Gina.
Thanks for chatting with me. I know you're in Bangkok, so the time difference is a lot, but thank you for sitting down with me.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Okay. For anyone who's not familiar with Roxy, he's nothing short of a legend. He's been part of Las Vegas sports betting since 1970, about there, I would say. Yeah.
Yes,
And he started Las Vegas Sports Consultants in the early 80s. And you were making odds for all of Las Vegas and eventually overseas, Australia, England, all over Europe. Is that true?
That's true. Yeah.
Okay. So Roxy has given his history on a lot of other interviews and podcasts, especially on Be Better Betters. You talked about coming up in the industry, and that's a great podcast. I think anyone wanting to know about Roxy should listen to that podcast. But I want to talk to you today about sports gambling as a business now versus then. I really want to
Okay.
focus on that. So real quick, give us like a primer on how you came up, and then we can get into sports gambling as a business.
Well, I was looking to escape conventional work, and I sort of had some problems with police in Vancouver over bookmaking up there, and it was a good idea. They suggested it was a good idea that I find another place to live. So I moved to Las Vegas. I wasn't going to be a bookmaker down here, but I ended up doing that later. My primary purpose was to escape conventional work. Now, it turned out to be successful. I was working 60 to 70 hours a week to avoid a conventional 40-hour week job. And the pay was commensurate at the time. But I could see a lot of flaws in some of the sportsbook operations, in the betting limits, and also how some of the odds were constructed. And I took off from there with a pretty limited bankroll. I had a $5,000 bankroll when I moved here.
Did you have any background in math or data before betting?
No. Well, my father was a Harvard MBA, and he was a statistics nut. But my last math class in school, I think, was algebra in grade 10.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had a conversation with you in the past about education. I believe you said you didn't graduate college, did you?
No.
No, right. So neither did I. And I think
Mm-hmm.
you said that part of your success was hiring people more knowledgeable than you. So I'm
I
assuming you
think
hired people who were good with numbers.
I did. Um, we always had one numbers guy, one mathematically based numbers guy. The first one, Mike Roden, was an engineer from Penn State, and he ended up co-writing Race and Sportsbook Management with me. Next, we had Joel Brewster, who had just happened to have these two majors from Cal Berkeley, statistics and probability theory.
There you go.
And both of those guys went on to successful betting careers after they left. And
Yeah.
of course, yeah. And Rufus Peabody, of course, was an intern in our office after I'd left. But the idea was, I always thought the hardest part was framing the questions. Data mining, computers were new, and there was a lot of data mining. It was giving you stuff like, Wednesday afternoon baseball games after a team lost the night before were such and such and such and such. And it was just data mining. So what we needed to do with the computers and the programs was to ask them, smart questions, just not let them run.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought I could ask the questions. I needed someone to give me the answers. And I still agree with that today. I still think if you want a career in sports gambling, you don't need a mathematical background, but you better have a partner who does. And if you wanted to go to school, I still think the best subject is economics, because almost all the financial and probability theories relating to gambling says a foundation in economics. And then if it turns out sports gambling isn't your thing, at least you got an education with a great subject. You can do something with it.
Yeah. I think, and I've thought for a long time that you can't be you're not going to be one of the most successful gambling crews without a numbers guy. Like you might, I played
Mm-hmm.
blackjack forever. We had to have a numbers guy, or we had to have at least have people that we could call on hand to run
Mm-hmm.
numbers for us. And if you don't have someone to do numbers for you,
Mm-hmm.
you're behind. You're just behind. So that's really important. And I don't do that stuff either.
Well, I think the perfect team, if you were going to start with three guys, of course, it's hard to find partners because you don't know how you're going to react in money situations. You
Hmm.
don't know if you're going to have the same tolerance for risk. You don't know if somebody is uh, not loyal or, let's say, unscrupulous unless you know them for a while. So there's a lot of things about finding partners. But in a perfect world, you'd want one handicapper, one numbers guy, and one bettor. And I don't think they're the same job. I think betting is absolutely an art and a science on its own, getting
Hmm.
down.
Hmm.
Um, I think the numbers guy is going to pull you out of the wrong directions more times than you would without him. And he's going to be able to find those edges. And the handicapper is going to be the basis of how you start to make your plays.
I completely agree with that. My strength has always been getting the information, getting the
Mm-hmm.
strategy or figuring out where the hole was in the casino and getting the money. I can get the
Mm-hmm.
money. I can't figure out the strategy and I can't break down the design of
Mm-hmm.
the game, but you help me and I'll go get the money. Like that's my
Yeah,
strong. And
big skill.
it's hard to find people who have both those skills. I don't know if you're familiar with James Grosjean. He wrote the book
No.
Beyond Counting, so
Uh-huh.
he's the best advantage player to ever live by anyone's standard, and he can do both. He can analyze the games better than anyone, and then he can go get the money. So
Mm-hmm.
did you have any experience in business, or did you also hire someone to run the business from the financial side?
Well, no, I did that myself, but it's not like we hired 40 people to start with. It's not like we went and got 75 million from a venture capital company. I
Right.
opened it with my checking account and I had one employee.
Yeah.
So as the business grew, I grew with it. But my father was a Harvard MBA, from class of 1953 before they started minting them for whoever wanted to pay for them.
Hmm.
And he had extensive financial backgrounds, mostly with um, trying to save companies that were on the verge of bankruptcy.
Hmm.
And he had this number skill and the ability to go to banks and beg for money, which
Okay.
is sort of like the betting skill, right?
Yeah.
And then when he was 50, he decided to run businesses on his own. He'd buy the companies that were going bankrupt, just not work for him.
Hmm.
So, and I worked in some of his restaurants up in Vancouver, and I got an idea of how a business should be run. But you don't get confronted with it until you want to grow, you want to hire more people, you need to manage your taxes, you need sales people, you
Hmm.
need tech people. You sort of grow with the business, though.
What did your dad think of your business?
I don't think my parents were very thrilled. I think they expected that I would take over the electrical contracting companies that my family had in Toronto.
Okay.
And maybe that was an out card in case things didn't work. But in fact, my mother thought going to Las Vegas was terrible. She wouldn't tell. She just said she had a son out west. And then one night I got interviewed by Dan Rather on
Hmm.
a show called 48 Hours. And everybody
Hmm.
called up my mom and I saw your son. I saw your son. Oh, yes. He's very famous in Las Vegas.
Oh, really? Dan rather
So,
legitimized you. That's awesome.
yeah. But let's talk about money, though.
Yeah, no, so if I wanted a loan from a bank, it's
Mm-hmm.
weeks of paperwork, it's going and having interviews, it's going through all of my financials. But if I want a loan from another gambler, it's a text or a phone call. So when you had a
Mm-hmm.
business and you're dealing on one side with gamblers and then on the other side with like legitimate business people. What's the difference? What's the big difference there?
Well, if you borrow money from gamblers, the problem I always had with that is if you don't give them a percentage, you just borrow money from them, there's going to be a time in the future when they need money and you're going to have to lend it to them.
Mm-hmm.
And as Shakespeare said, never a lender or borrower be. And that's when I was playing poker. I didn't lend money to other players because I knew I wasn't going to be broke. And I didn't want to have to turn around and I mean, I was never going to ask them
Mm-hmm.
for money.
Yeah.
So I didn't lend out money. I mean, I borrowed money from a poker room in Caesars, pretty famous guy, for an overnight rate because I saw boxing arbitrage.
Okay.
And I ran out of cash.
Yeah.
And I borrowed 50,000 off him at 1%. It's called the overnight rate. You pay it back the next day.
1%.
But he knew he was going to get it back. He knew he was going to get it back.
Yeah.
I think
it was a smaller community too. I imagine if you didn't pay back in that situation, everybody would know Roxy doesn't pay his debts. And then
sure,
reputation is shot. Yeah.
It would cut you off with other bookmakers.
Yeah.
With street bookmakers would basically, you'd be persona non grata.
So what's the difference between a cash business, sports betting, and sports betting now with Bitcoin and PayPal and credit cards? What's the big
taxes? I mean, that's another subject.
Yeah.
But definitely taxes.
Taxes and access.
Yes. The other thing is that when you bet cash and you went over the counter, people have a tendency not to say no when you're standing there in front of the counter with a lot of money. It's pretty easy to say no when some algorithm is guys trying to make a bet and you get the spinning wheel and then they reject it. Now that still happens today in Las Vegas. If you go to the counter and bet cash, you're getting pretty close to the biggest. Sharp guys are getting the biggest limits in the U.S. by going to the counter in Las Vegas, and they have limits. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of times they'll take more than the limit. But if you want to bet more than the limit, you can get a little bit. You can get creative too. I remember when I was doing really well in baseball totals, and I had a bookmaker who didn't take them, mm-hmm. and he was taking 5,000 on the sides and nothing on the totals. This is a street bookmaker, and I made a proposal to him that if he gave me every game on the board at 11 to 10 with none of this over and under the favorite stuff, I bet him every game on the board for a dime. Next day, he said, "Yeah, we'll do that." Mm-hmm. And it was pretty good edge in it for me, actually. Because the games I didn't have any opinion with, I was only throwing off 1 or 2% because he didn't have anybody over and under favorite straight 11 or 10. Plus, I could find other numbers to arb it out. Mm-hmm. And then the ones I had an opinion on, I had an ROI of around 12%. So you can get creative, I think, but you can only do that one-on-one usually. So Zig Ziglar used to say you can get anything out of life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want.
Okay.
So I don't think there's people say, well, gee, I can't get down, or people whining, I can't get a bet. Well, why don't you find a bookmaker you can work with? Not just an account.
But can you go at the time you're talking about betting with that example with a street bookie mm-hmm. in the 80s, 90s, could you go into the mm-hmm. Stardust and make a deal like that?
Yes. Sure.
But you can't do that now. You can't walk into Caesars. You're going to get a suit. Yeah, you can't do that.
I mean, I had a deal with Churchill Downs, the largest independent sports book in Nevada, mm-hmm. where I could bet them 2,000 between 8 and 8:30. They didn't even open till 9:30 on the baseball totals.
Okay.
Now, 2000 in 1978, I just looked it up, it's worth 10,000 a day. Why could I do that? Because they had a better use for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand that.
That was going somewhere where they could do better than I could. It was obviously going outside the state, but the reason I had to have the bets in between 8, it was a long series of events. A mob bookmaker would open up at 7:30.
Mm-hmm.
He'd get all the action till 8. Churchill would use his closing lines, give them to me at 8:30. I would bet them 2,000 on the totals that I wanted, and I don't know what they were doing with it. They weren't keeping it. So that's quite a chain of events.
Yeah.
Now, eventually somebody ends up holding the bag, but I know I'm going to get paid. So, and I know people are making more money off it than me, but I'm making a lot more than I could without them.
Right, right.
So things like that happen. I mean, there's still negotiations available. When you get very good at one particular aspect of sports gaming, like Rufus has got done with golf, opportunities open up. There are people that can probably bet more than Rufus can bet, and they can help him.
Yeah, you have
And
to you have to be social also. Like if you have, you have a numbers guy in your crew and you have a handicapper and they're not very social, well, the bettor should be social because you can't make those deals with people if you can't have a conversation with somebody. So that's part of it. It's part of the
I
art.
totally agree.
Yeah, the art
It
of
is part of the art. Yeah.
Do you
So, I mean, there's still places today on the few things that I am betting, they can get much higher limits, but I need help. And I have people that will help me. And I've also found somebody that was handicapping for English soccer for me with expected goals before they got to be a big thing. But we're working on something else right now. And he wasn't, he was a university professor. And then he got this morbid job. He left to work for the National Institute of Health in London to model COVID deaths. And he really didn't care about the money. He didn't want to know who he had. He just wanted to know what his percentage was at the end of the year because he thought he'd worry about it. And it would change the way he looked at football or soccer.
Yeah.
So a lot of good work is being done by people that really don't gamble. Look what Bill James and Fangraphs and Baseball Prospectus has done with baseball. It turned it upside down. And yeah, there's some guys that make bets there, but not a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that modern sports books are leaving money on the table by not taking larger bets? Here's my question. Do you think that modern sports books, if they invested more money in their odds makers or their content and invested more money in their trading department and took higher limits, that they'd make more of a profit? Or do you think that the way they're operating now is optimal for them?
They're probably operating pretty close to optimal. It's just too expensive to go out and build these trading networks with knowledgeable people, and you'll still never be better than the players. You'll come back to what I said earlier. You'll have to figure out what to do with this information that has a use for you, not just paying out the bettors. It does remind me that in Nevada, we left a lot of money on the table. If I look back on it, now I left the business in 1999. But boy, we should have been more aggressive with parlays. I don't think we had the wherewithal to figure out how to do single game parlays back then, but we should have been much more aggressive with parlays. We should have let people parlay almost everything, non-correlated almost everything, multiple sports. Now, some of it was limited by the software, but we just, sometimes also the software wasn't good at telling you what your liability was. Like people don't know what their liabilities to this day are exactly on parlay cards. But we did leave a lot of money on the table. Who knew in baseball that first 5 inning bets would be a bonanza, right?
Popular.
Yeah, I could have figured that out, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So maybe because when you come back to monopolies, so I had a monopoly on the odds business in Nevada, and my partner Vic Salerno had a monopoly on the software business. And there's not much incentive to do much when you have a monopoly. I mean, people want custom software. I don't know. It's pretty hard you got to figure out how to talk them out of it because you're making so much money replicating the same product.
Mm-hmm.
and all customization really is not beneficial to you. And so you get stagnant. Of course, then when the other states ended up expanding, they didn't bother with Nevada software because it wasn't even close to what they wanted to do.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Um, do you regret at all not being in the business after 2018? Do you have any, I wish I was part of this. I wish I was part of what's going on right now.
Well, I would have to given up 18 years of my life
Yes.
to be around
Yes.
to make another score. I don't think so.
Did,
That's one thing I have no regrets about.
did you have stress when you were the odds maker if books were losing? Were they calling you up and giving you a hard time? Did that happen
Yeah,
often?
yeah. A lot of times you're getting paid for therapy
Okay.
um, because basically we used to issue these managers reports every Monday in football season, basically say how the state did. We'd get a cross section of what happened in northern Nevada,
Hmm.
what happened in locals places in Las Vegas, and what happens in the strip places. And then we sort of always played the worst effect of it. We didn't exaggerate it. We just told it like it was.
Hmm.
And then what happened, they'd go out on fax machine every Monday and people would just wait for them, wait for them, wait for them. And if they lost, if they won, they just threw it in the trash. If they lost, they made sure they ran right upstairs to say, see,
Really?
everybody else lost. Yeah. It was a little more sophisticated than that.
Yeah.
But
It
yeah.
must have been hard. I think you were so far ahead of the game, technologically speaking, when you're talking to like a sportsbook manager trying to explain
Mhm.
the long run or EV.
Mhm.
That had to be rough.
Well, you need to empathize with your customers. And sportsbooks managers' number one priority is to keep employed. So they're pretty risk averse. They would rather win less money over a year if it included less variation. So they don't have to go to their bosses to explain bad weeks. So once you understand that, you understand where they're coming from.
In general, how do you view money that most people non-gambling world don't?
Well, one way to explain it to the layman is if you're a carpenter, you go to work with a hammer. And if you're a gambler, you go to work with money. It's a tool of the trade. It's a way to measure success or failure. Very important to measure failure. And in the end, though, the carpenter and the gambler are looking to do the same thing in my worldview, which is increase their well-being and the well-being of their family. So the end game for money really is not to just accumulate money. It's so that you have a happier life, a better life, and that your family has a better life. Money helps you have better health outcomes, gives better educational chances for your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually can buy you love in the sense that this is maybe old school, but most women dating or looking for a husband would like to have somebody who has a secure financial future, because it's a lot easier to raise a family with a secure financial future than with none.
Yeah.
So the end game probably is the same. Now, how we go out, how we look at it is totally different. If you're the reason it's hard to transition for a lot of people from going to a regular job to gambling is if you're thinking about, excuse me, if you're thinking about $3,000 as a new refrigerator, you shouldn't be in the gambling business.
Mm-hmm.
If you're thinking that you win $20,000 one month and you've got your eyeball in a new car that you want, you shouldn't be in the gambling business. The number one thing you should do, as Captain Jack famously has said, when you accumulate money in gambling, you use the biggest portion of it to increase your bankroll, to give you more leverage and more opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always thought it was pretty difficult for people to work and gamble too, because you're looking at this paycheck and it's one size, and then maybe you're taking a week's pay and betting it on a weekend.
Mm-hmm.
To me, if you really were going to be a gambler, full time, you should quit that job. Now, that's easier said than done because people have different life circumstances. But it doesn't make any sense to say you're making $2,000 a week and then you've got 3,000 spread against the weekend's football games. To me, there's no logic to that. And I know people can't do that. I don't mean people really shouldn't quit their job to be a professional gambler anyway. What they ought to do is try to be a better gambler than they are now. So they should try to get close to even, or maybe figure out how to win a little bit, which I think winning small is pretty easy to do.
I agree.
And then what happens is you'll end up getting in, if you start accumulating more money, you'll have to start looking at how do you manage your variation. You should probably understand Kelly betting, but I don't think you should use it, but you should understand it. You should understand about opportunity costs, time cost of money, diminishing marginal utility, but all these things come after you start producing money above your living expenses.
I was thinking about Kelly betting earlier this week, and I've never used it ever to determine a bet size. I don't know if you started out, I don't even know what year that became popular, but yeah, I've never used Kelly. I've never used quarter Kelly ever, but the concept is strong. The concept that you should,
Oh, yeah.
have a unit size and that you should resize your bankroll, just resizing your bankroll and then resizing your unit is is a is something simple, but it's something that Kelly can teach you. And then also just using quarter Kelly, like obviously if you're using full Kelly, you're going to go broke in the real world. And then if you're using quarter Kelly, at least you understand, oh, more units is safer. Just it's such a silly, simple concept, but just understanding it matters.
I think understanding it is very important. Of course, and most of it is applications are great theoretically, but people aren't going to offer you 2-to-1 on coin flips. And, blackjack would probably come as close to having an application if you thought you were going to make the optimal play all the time, which really no one ever gets to the optimal play every time. Well, I'll let you discuss that, but let me conclude on Kelly. The reason you ought to know it, and if you want to use a quarter Kelly when you're starting out, tell you what it will do. It'll give you discipline. You won't be scattered all over the place. You won't be betting one game for 500 and one game for 200. And it'll give you some respect for your bankroll and how much tolerance you can take. And it does spread out risk. I mean, Ed Markowitz won a Nobel Prize for talking about what's called the free lunch, that diversification can lower variation and give you higher returns. So I think people ought to know it.
The problem with that is then you have to make some arbitrary decisions. Like when are you going to resize? You can't make a bet, get paid on a bet, have it graded, and then resize your bankroll. Like you can't do that all day. Are you doing it at the end of the day, at the end of the week? And then there's a difference between your bankroll and your account balance. Your bankroll, if you're playing blackjack, it's like what's your table bankroll and then what's your actual bankroll. If your bankroll's $10,000, but you have $1,000 in your account and you have 100 units, that's 10 units in your account. Like, do you want to risk going broke or do you want to bet less money and possibly stay in action longer? So there are other things to think about, even if you're betting Kelly.
Yeah. Well, also on with Kelly is brings out optimal bets and rational bets. It's pretty hard to ever make an optimal bet in sports betting, I think, because there's a lot of arbitrary inputs. It's easy to look back on it and determine what they were. Rational betting also gives you the idea of how much variation you really want to have. I mean, how much risk tolerance can you take? It's different for everybody. And then when you actually get more money than you need or extensive bankroll, and then Kelly totally goes out the window because you're trying to bet as much as you can with a 2% edge as you can with a 5% edge. Because the chances are of you getting large bets at the 5% edge won't be as good as getting large bets at a 2% edge, but they're both edges.
Mm-hmm.
So then it goes totally out the window. You're just trying to bet as much as you can, within what you can take for tolerance. But there's a lot of things people ought to know, and people ought to know about Kelly, and they ought to understand it.
Did you have a number? Did you have a number when your bankroll got to X, or your business got, your net worth got to X, that you were done? You were done working so hard. Did you have a number? And did that number change the more successful you got?
Well, number one, I didn't have a number. And when I first started, I was interested in having a nice apartment in a nice area of town and a new car and money for ladies and whiskey. And that's basically all I thought about. I really didn't have, I didn't have much of a nut.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have much ambition. That was my ambition.
Okay.
And then, of course, your ambition goes up and down based on your opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is when I never could realize all the equity I had and all the work I'd put in until I sold the businesses.
Right. Okay.
So, so what happens is you end up getting, I sold every business that I had, about 6 of them, to a publicly traded corporation that was going to pay me 7 times earnings added to their bottom line, and they were trading at 17 or 18 times earnings. So it was basically a good deal for them. It's a very good deal for me.
Mm-hmm.
We'll go back to the same thing. You need to help somebody else to get what you want, right?
Yeah.
So, and so I never really, then I ended up with more money than I ever thought I could ever use or ever spend.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I had a very comfortable living getting there too. Yeah.
Yeah. What changed after you sold your businesses in terms of money? Like, you had money coming in, and then you got a
Mm-hmm.
big lump sum of money, and now
Mm-hmm.
you don't have money coming in like it
Mm-hmm.
was before. Did anything
Yeah.
change, like, with your perspective?
Well, I think this is sort of common. When people retire, they always want to know if they have enough money or not.
Mm-hmm.
They're always worried maybe I don't have enough money.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably a little overblown because no one's stopping you from going back to work. Now, if you're older, maybe you can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was 48. I mean, nothing was ever going to stop me from
You
going
were
back to
only
work.
48 when you sold
Yeah,
everything? Oh
yeah.
my
I've been
goodness.
out of the business longer than I was in it.
Wow.
So the main thing when I sold the company is I had this non-compete for 3 years, and I extended it to 5 years because I knew that if it was 3 years, I was going to hang around Las Vegas,
Mm-hmm.
wait for that non-compete to be done. I could start the business because you always know you can do it better the second time.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everything you do in life, you can do it better the second time. The question is, do you want to revisit it or not? In my case, I didn't. I started spending a lot of time in Thailand because to escape communications, because when I first moved there, the internet wasn't there and mobile phones really weren't there either.
Mm-hmm.
And I never got one. And so I was just living a life oblivious to what was going on outside of reading a newspaper in the morning. And I sort of like that.
You wanted to get off the grid. Oh, I
Yeah.
haven't heard. I haven't heard. I guess you hear kind of stories, so and so made a lot of money and then moved to somewhere and you never hear about them again, but I
Mm-hmm.
never met anyone that did that. But you still hang out in gambling circles, and you still
Yes.
spend time with those people you came up with. What is it about
Mm-hmm.
the gambling world that you can't quit?
Um, no one really ever gets out of it, I don't think. That's a rare person.
True.
Yeah. Well, first of all, they're your friends.
Yeah.
Okay. So, um, and you also, when not everybody, success isn't linear. If it would be, the more hours you put in, the better you do. So what happens, we all have bad times, good times. Sometimes bookmakers lose their jobs. Sometimes they don't get one for a couple of years. And sometimes they're riding high. Salaries are big. And then networking of sports books came in and nobody needed managers. And lots of things happen. So you share good times and bad times.
Mm-hmm.
And Victor Salerno was my partner I mean, I've known him for 45 years. We were partners from the first year he moved to Las Vegas until I retired. And then we still crossed on some each other's businesses. So those are great friendships. I'm really interested in a lot of the people that are coming in today. And that's the one thing that BetBash and Twitter has helped me. I'm not very active on Twitter. About once every 2 months or once a month, I might tweet something. But I'm really, if I can provide some historical perspective, but I'm really interested in seeing new players, what they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at how smart they are. I'm also understand they're working in a new business where they expect to get paid. So that's why I find it unfathomable that somebody can crunch numbers to come out with 75 basis points or less than 1% edge. And people think that they found the holy grail to get 1.5% edge.
Right.
I mean, we knew we weren't going to get paid because we had a little more risk tolerance. We were really going out for the outlying numbers. We weren't betting into the consensus numbers around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we always knew there was going to be laydowns, but this new generation doesn't know about them. But one of the reasons is they're not taking on enough risk, in my opinion. They should be finding some places in Asia or some places somewhere where they might not get paid, but the ROI will be worth it.
Yeah.
But it's totally different.
Yeah, there are spots where you can get a double-digit edge these days that aren't in sports betting, that aren't, severely hard to find.
Uh-huh.
And people are at their computers all day picking off 1% edges, 1% edges, and I don't I don't know if they don't imagine those spots are available or they seem too good to be true. I don't know. I'm not coding. I'm not originating. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just looking for
Yeah.
easy spots that somebody just overlooked, and I've been doing this long
Yeah.
enough to find it.
I feel more the same way you do. And if you're chasing a 1% edge, you got a lot of partners too. I mean, there's no
Yes.
one man, there's no one man operations that are coding, getting down and
Mhm.
managing their bankroll. So that they're splitting that 1% up a lot. Now I know they're getting a lot of turnover. So but generally the bigger edges are in the less liquid markets, and sometimes there's time constraints on them, which now the time cost of money, when the time cost of money was nothing, which it was for a lot of years,
Mhm.
I measure the time cost of money against the 2-year US Treasury, the 5-year US Treasury, because they're essentially the world standard for safety. And if you do absolutely nothing, that's what you could earn.
Mhm.
So if you take a look at when interest rates get up around 5%, or bank CDs start paying 5%, or now they're paying 4% for a year, it makes future bets look a little different. So you're cutting off half if you think you've got an 8% edge, if you can never calculate exactly what it is, but you think you've got an 8% edge, and that's chopping it in half.
Mhm.
So that makes your variance higher because you have no variance in the treasury bills.
Right.
So the time cost of money is coming back into the game, and it's pretty important for operators too, the ones that have cash deposits that are able to use them other than post them as bonds, like a lot of the legal operators. So a lot of the illegal operators, cash deposits are a godsend for them when interest rates are higher.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Gary Bowman, who started one of the first international betting operations in the world, down in Mauritius, he was getting 7 or 8% on his money when this was in the 90s. And I asked him, how you doing? He says, I'm just trying to break even. He didn't want his players to go broke.
Right.
I mean, he did, but he wanted to go broke slowly. The interest, and then he was getting bank loans off those deposits and everything. And
Mm-hmm.
he was investing in real estates and clubs and stuff. So the time cost of money is a fact of life for everybody, whether you're in the gambling business or not.
Do you think this is such a general question? Do you think it's easier to find Do you think it's easier to make money betting sports now than 30 years ago, 1980, 1990?
I think it's easier to scale it, because you're really at limited places in the 80s for sure. But I think it's harder to find the type of bets that you would want to scale. Then you've got to find somebody who wants to take them too. So, in one sense, it's easier now. You're getting paid at a higher rate, and you have a chance to scale if you're creative. But the out and out things where you could grab 10 or 15%, no. I
Yeah.
mean, some of the things that have disappeared, open-ended teasers were pretty good when 7 points is priced at $1.20. And this went on for a lot of years. This isn't one thing. This went on for over 10 years. I mean, they say Wong teasers. I mean, we were betting them in the late 70s and 80s.
Oh, I
And
didn't
we
know
were
that.
betting them with the over and unders were down to 36 and 37 in the NFL. And it went on for years. And you could get them open-ended, which means you didn't have to play. You could finish them off the next week or the week after that. And these were a gold mine for a lot of years. And the thing was that the average player played teasers so bad that they held a lot of money in teasers. They
Yeah.
didn't bother to go out and parse to see who was beating them. They
Mhm.
just knew that they don't want to end this bet. So I think that existed then. Now they key in on bettors more than they key in on the proposition itself.
Yeah, the public was camouflaged for the sharp
Mhm.
betters. I think
Mhm.
it's really easy to find a 1% edge right now. I think we agree on
Mhm.
that. But I think
Yes.
you have so much more competition. Like if you're,
Mhm.
I don't know, arbing online, like the
Mhm.
competition is kind of fierce. So it might be easier to find a small edge, but you're competing with all these really smart young guys that are coming up that
Yeah.
can also find that same edge and
I've
faster.
never looked. I've never looked at arbitraging. There's all kinds of chaotic things. The things that have the biggest edge and don't have the same rules,
Right.
like political elections. People don't ever think about that. You have arbitrage opportunities forever, but the rules are different.
Hmm.
I've seen the Senate as who gets control of it, which includes the vice president if they have to vote. I've seen the Senate listed as which party wins the most, and they don't include the two independents that vote with the Democrats. I've seen it where it is included with the two Democrats,
Hmm.
the vote independent. And a lot of the stuff is have to wait for runoff elections. So you may lose on one side and not get the other side's money for a couple more months.
Hmm.
To me, that's the arbitraging elections. Everybody says how lucrative it is. Well, look, we had 4 years ago, we didn't know when the election, I mean, who was going to be inaugurated for a while.
Hmm.
So, or when the electoral college vote was going to be counted. So people just don't look at rules all the time when they're trying to arb bets. Very few sports books have the exact same rules.
I as far as sports betting is concerned, I spend half of my time, literally half of my time doing admin work, which is like accounting or logging bets and
Mm-hmm.
results and
Mm-hmm.
reading terms and conditions. I read terms
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
conditions like it's my job because it is my job and you will find discrepancies and it's become a lot easier for me in the last year because I can use AI because a lot of it is the same and I can copy paste well what's different between these two passages, but if you do read the terms and conditions, you can find things to exploit. It happens, and these sports books, it's modern sports books. The industry is like over $10 billion. I don't know, $15 billion
Mm-hmm.
dollars now. And I just think in general, they're so bad at business. I think as far as industries go, for as big an industry as sports betting is in America, they are the worst
Mm-hmm.
run business that
Mm-hmm.
size. They are run so poorly between banking and customer
Mm-hmm.
service. And the upside is that they don't cover all of their landscape.
The way I feel about arbitraging is like how I feel about FX trading. It's probably the most liquid market in the world, and the spreads are so small that you can't imagine that you couldn't win.
Hmm.
But all the smartest guys in the world are in it. Now you can get in it if you have a better use for it. If you're
Hmm.
taking insurance against some real estate or some other investments you have, or you can get in it to defray currency risk in foreign stock markets. But to actually get on their day trade and think you could beat the world's greatest computers and financial institutions, try trading FXs. To me, it's like a pipe dream.
What else, Roxy? What else is going on?
Well, the one thing I've talked about, I think we haven't opportunity cost comes up quite a bit. And so extreme example of opportunity cost would be, let's say 4 years ago, you could lay 100 to 1 that Meghan Markle wouldn't be the next president of the United States. I think that would be a great bet.
Wait, where? Are you talking about England?
4 years ago, you could actually bet
Meghan Markle
would not be the next president of the United States. You could bet she wouldn't. You could
Prince
bet she
Harry's
would or
wife.
she wouldn't.
Prince
Huh?
Harry's wife? Or is that who we're
Yes,
talking
yeah.
about? Oh,
Yes, yes.
Okay. I thought you said Angela Merkel. Okay.
No, not Angela. She had the same price.
Okay.
Meghan
Okay.
Markle and Angela Merkel had the same price
Okay.
of being elected president of the United States.
Okay.
And let's say you can lay 100 to 1 and you've got $100,000 in your account and you use it all to make this bet. So now that account's empty and the opportunity cost of all the things you could have done.
Yeah.
If that money hadn't been tied up in this automatic win, which so opportunity cost, I think the economists describe it as the value of the next best thing you can do with your money. So it comes up quite a bit. It comes up, it's more subtle about how you're running balances down at various sports books. And it comes up a lot in future book betting. How much of an account can you drain with future book betting? It's pretty hard to get credit on future book betting. I did get credit for a lot of years on future book betting, and then they basically said you can have credit, but you can't get it on future book betting because it was like a free roll, the way I looked at it. So that's one thing we didn't touch on. And the other thing we hadn't talked about is diminishing marginal utility, which is actually it's a foundation of the way we governments take care of people that aren't doing as well. It's the reason we have progressive taxes, we have social welfare, because, how do I explain this? Okay, if you gave $10,000 to a millionaire, it has what they call diminished marginal utility. If you get same 10,000 to somebody who's homeless, it's not the same, right? The same amount of money, but the marginal utility is diminished quite a bit. And that happens in gambling too. I mean, when you win your first 10,000, it won't be, let's say you make $1 million and that last 10,000 won't hardly mean anything compared to that first 10,000.
Right.
And that's very existent in gambling. A lot of that has to do with what your opportunities are to win more money or to make more money.
For sure.
So if you're a doctor, or let's say you're making a lot of money in a law practice, you're 50 years old, you can overcome adversity with a high-paying job. 50-year-old guy who's working in a factory has some financial adversity, probably only has like 10 more years to try to overcome that and still save for retirement. So I think a lot of it has to do on your ability to make money at that point in your life. 21 years old, I went broke a few times in gambling, but you go broke, they were all when I was young, and then you just hustle up another bankroll.
Yeah.
A lot harder to do when you get older. You don't know if you want to go through with it, for starters, and you get certainly depressed. If you're 50 and you're broke, that's a pretty bad thing, I think. And then if you throw bad health in there, that's another one. But I think the way to wrap this up is, what is the end game for money? And I come back to what I said earlier, it's well-being. So how much money you need to have a well-being for yourself, to make yourself happy, to take care of medical problems if you have them, or join gyms to keep you healthy. Your kids can go to good schools. I think this all is the end game for everybody's well-being.
Do you think, because you probably hang out with more very wealthy people than I do you think Do you think do you think very wealthy people, and I'm talking about, net worths over, I don't know, $10 million,
Hmm.
value money less than people who don't have it? Do you think that
Well,
they don't take
yeah,
it, I don't want to say as seriously, but they're more carefree about it because they have it and they know they can get it. Whereas if somebody doesn't have money, that's their whole personality is that they don't have money. It runs their life.
yeah, that's a tough one. I think that there's some studies that recently have shown that if you increase a rich person's bankroll by 10% and a poor person's bankroll by 10%, they both get a 10% increase in happiness. Now, that's the money's a lot bigger
Hmm.
for somebody who has $10 million versus somebody who has $10,000. That's a hard one. One thing you can talk about with other people who have money, you can talk about money.
Hmm.
And it's pretty hard to talk to people that don't have much money about money.
Yeah.
That's been my experience. Yeah, and it's also hard to talk to non-gamblers about money too. So.
It's so hard. And also, I have gambling friends, and then when I became a mom, I gained more non-gambling friends.
Hmm.
And there are only a few where I could talk about money with who don't, you win a lot, I don't know, you win 10K in a week or whatever, and they understand that I don't do that every week or some number. Like you have
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
a lot of people don't understand that you lose also, or that your money, all the money that you have is actually a tool for you, and
Yeah.
it's not money that you can go spend. And it's really hard to talk to people about money in the gambling world. I remember I was on a blackjack trip with, my team, and we talk about money very freely. And I asked one of their wives, who was not a real gambler, how much she made at her day job. And it was like,
Hmm.
I offended them. Like, how dare I ask such a
Hmm.
personal question? I was like,
Hmm. Hmm.
what's the
Hmm.
problem here? I'm
Yeah.
just curious how much you make. Yeah. People
Yeah.
are uncomfortable talking about money for sure,
Hmm.
which then makes me uncomfortable. Thanks for talking to me. This was
Hey,
fun.
we I had a good time,
Yeah, I had a good
and
time.
it's I like to have a good time. That's one of the reasons I stopped doing podcasts because I wasn't having a good time. But I did have a good time today.
All right. It's always a pleasure. I hope I see you when you're back in Vegas. I'd like to go to dinner with you and your wife. I really like her. She's great.
Well, good. We like you too, and I don't think that'll be hard.
All right. Thanks. Okay.
Okay. Bye
All
bye.
right. Thanks, Roxy. Thank you for listening to this discussion with Roxy Roxborough. Roxy is one of the most interesting people I've met in sports betting. I wish I could have included what we talked about off camera. If you ever get the chance to meet Roxy and strike up a conversation, he'll probably share with you a story you've never heard before. Please like this podcast, subscribe, and share it with your friends. If you sign up for a demo with Unabated to explore the tools they have to offer, they will give you a 5-day free trial. The link is in the bio. Have a great day.